In this episode, we're going to connect the dots between how credential attacks actually unfold and why their impact rarely stays contained to one single account. Beginners often picture a compromised login as a small, isolated problem, like one door was opened and you just need to shut it again. Real environments do not behave that neatly because accounts are connected to other accounts, systems are connected to other systems, and a login is often the starting gun for a chain of follow-on access. The goal here is to build a mental map that helps you trace a credential attack from the first suspicious login attempt to the full set of places the attacker can potentially reach. When you can map methodology to impact, you stop reacting only to the first alert and start thinking in terms of pathways, dependencies, and downstream risk. That kind of thinking is what turns incident handling from guesswork into controlled decision-making. A good map starts with the idea that identity is a shared language across systems, even when the systems look different on the surface. One person might have an email account, a collaboration account, a workstation login, a cloud portal login, and a set of access tokens for apps, but those identities often refer back to the same underlying user record. Many organizations centralize that record in a directory service, DS, which becomes the source of truth for who you are and what groups you belong to. When an attacker compromises credentials, they are not just taking a password, they are taking a way to speak that shared identity language to many systems. Even when passwords differ across systems, single sign-on can link access together in a way that makes one compromised identity extremely valuable. That is why mapping must include the identity layer, not just the application where the alert first appeared. Now think about a credential attack as a short sequence of stages that tends to repeat, even when the exact technique changes. First, the attacker gathers targets by collecting usernames, email addresses, or other identity hints from public sources, past breaches, or internal discovery. Next, they attempt authentication using a chosen method, such as reusing leaked pairs, trying common passwords across many accounts, or using stolen secrets from phishing. Then they validate success, which means they confirm the access is real and stable, not just a one-time fluke. After that, they expand the session by looking for what the account can reach, what permissions it has, and what tools it can open without additional checks. Finally, they decide whether to monetize quickly, persist quietly, or pivot deeper into the environment. When you map an incident, these stages become checkpoints where you ask what evidence should exist and what impact is most likely. The first real branching point in your map is which type of account is involved, because not all accounts are equally powerful even if they look similar in a login screen. A personal user account usually has access to that person's data and whatever shared resources their role requires, which can still be a lot. A service account often has automated access to systems and may be used by software to perform tasks in the background, which can mean wide permissions and less interactive oversight. An administrative account is designed to change settings, create new access, and manage systems, which makes it disproportionately dangerous if compromised. Some environments also have shared accounts, emergency accounts, or vendor accounts that exist for convenience, and those tend to have weaker monitoring and unclear ownership. Mapping methodology to impact means you identify which category you are dealing with early, because the same credential technique produces very different blast radius depending on the account's role. The next big question is whether the environment uses single sign-on, SSO, because SSO turns a single authentication event into a passport for multiple services. With SSO, an attacker who successfully authenticates once may be able to access email, file storage, internal apps, and cloud consoles without repeatedly typing a password at each service. That changes both the attacker's workflow and the defender's urgency, because the number of reachable systems grows quickly. It also changes the evidence you should look for, because the authentication logs may show one central success followed by many service access events that appear legitimate. In a map, you treat the SSO provider as a hub, and you list the spokes, meaning the services that trust that hub's decision. If the hub is compromised, you assume each spoke could be touched, even if you have not yet observed misuse in each one. A practical mapping habit is to separate authentication from authorization, because attackers can succeed at the first while still being blocked at the second, and both outcomes matter. Authentication answers the question of who you are, while authorization answers what you are allowed to do after you are known. Many beginners stop mapping once they see a successful login, but impact depends on permissions, group memberships, and conditional checks. An attacker who compromises a low-privilege account might still reach sensitive data if that account can access shared folders, internal dashboards, or customer systems. Another attacker might have a high-privilege account, but still need extra approval steps to perform certain actions, such as changing billing or disabling security controls. When you map, you write down what the account can do in the most important categories: read data, change settings, create new access, and interact with other identities. Those capabilities determine the likely impact paths, not the mere fact of login. Email deserves special attention in any credential attack map because email is both a target and a launching platform. If an attacker gains access to email, they can reset passwords for other services through recovery links, which turns one compromised account into many. They can also search the mailbox for prior invoices, login notifications, internal links, or shared secrets that were never meant to be stored long-term. Even without stealing a password from the mailbox, an attacker can send messages that look legitimate because they come from a real internal address, which boosts the success of follow-on phishing. Email access also enables stealthy persistence through forwarding rules, mailbox delegation, or filtering tricks that hide replies and alerts. When you map impact, email sits near the top because it can amplify the attack across both technical systems and human trust. If you are tracing a credential incident, treat email control as a multiplier, not just one more application. Cloud services add another layer to the mapping problem because they tie identity to data storage, compute services, and administrative control planes. A compromised cloud identity might provide access to file repositories, customer data, internal applications, and the ability to create new resources. It can also expose secrets stored in configuration settings, like access keys for integrations, which can allow the attacker to reach systems that are not even inside the cloud. Many cloud environments use identity and access management, IAM, roles and policies that can be confusing to beginners, but you do not need to master every detail to map risk. You simply need to ask what the identity can access directly, what it can modify, and whether it can assume other roles or request elevated permissions. In your map, you treat cloud access as both data exposure and service control because the attacker might steal information, disrupt services, or create backdoors for later use. The workstation and endpoint angle is also important because accounts are used to log into devices, and devices store clues and access artifacts. If an attacker compromises a workstation login, they may gain access to saved browser sessions, cached tokens, and stored credentials, even if they never learn additional passwords directly. They might also use the device to move inside the network because the device already has trusted connectivity and sometimes privileged tooling. A workstation login can lead to internal file shares, remote desktop access, or business apps that are only reachable from inside the environment. On the other hand, some credential attacks are purely remote and never touch endpoints, which changes the evidence and the response plan. When you map methodology to impact, you decide whether the compromised identity was used to access a device, because that is a sign the attacker may be trying to expand access beyond the original account's permissions. It is a key pivot point between account abuse and broader intrusion. Another concept that improves mapping is lateral movement, which is the attacker's habit of using one success to reach the next system, often by exploiting trust relationships. Trust can be technical, like a system accepting SSO tokens, or organizational, like a help desk believing a request that appears to come from a valid internal user. Trust can also be embedded in shared resources, such as network drives that many people can access or shared admin panels used by teams. A credential attack map should include these trust bridges, because they explain why the impact grows even if only one password was compromised. If you see a compromised account that belongs to a regular employee, you still ask whether that employee can request access, approve workflows, or influence others. If you see a compromised admin account, you assume the attacker can create new users, change permissions, and hide their tracks by modifying logs or security settings. Lateral movement is the storyline that links those possibilities into a coherent chain. Mapping is not only about where the attacker can go, but also about what kinds of harm they can cause in each place, because the same access can be used for different outcomes. In one system, the impact might be confidentiality, meaning sensitive data is read or copied. In another system, the impact might be integrity, meaning records are changed, permissions are modified, or transactions are altered. In another system, the impact might be availability, meaning a service is disrupted or a resource is deleted. Credential attacks often start as confidentiality events, like viewing mail or files, but can quickly become integrity events, like changing payment details or creating new admin users. When you map, you assign an impact type to each system the attacker might reach, because that guides what you prioritize. A system that holds payroll data might be a confidentiality priority, while a system that controls production services might be an availability priority, and both can stem from the same stolen login. Evidence mapping is the discipline of tying each stage and each impact path to the kinds of signals you should expect to see, even if you do not have perfect visibility. Authentication logs tell you about successes and failures, but they also tell you about patterns, such as many accounts failing once, one account failing many times, or odd geographic sources. Application logs tell you what actions were taken after login, such as downloads, exports, permission changes, or admin operations. Email audit records can reveal rule changes, mass forwarding, or new delegations that create persistence. Device telemetry can show whether a new device signed in, whether a browser session was created, or whether a token was reused unexpectedly. A useful mapping habit is to ask, for each system, what a normal user typically does there, and then look for deviations in timing, volume, location, and sequence. The more your map links actions to evidence, the faster you can test hypotheses without guessing. A careful map also considers time, because credential attacks can unfold in minutes or quietly stretch over weeks, and each tempo leaves different traces. High-speed attacks like spraying or brute force generate obvious failure spikes, while theft-based attacks may show a clean, successful login followed by deliberate, low-noise actions. Stuffing can be fast and broad, but the attacker may only act on a few successes, which can make the most dangerous part look small at first. In longer incidents, attackers may return repeatedly, using the same account at different times or switching between accounts as they expand access. This is why mapping should include the idea of persistence, meaning whether the attacker has created a way to regain access even if the password changes. Persistence can be technical, like adding a new recovery method, or operational, like collecting enough internal context to phish effectively later. Time-based thinking helps you avoid assuming the first detection moment is the first attack moment, which is a common beginner mistake. Putting it all together, you can think of credential incident mapping as building a graph in your head, with identities as nodes, systems as nodes, and trust relationships as edges that connect them. The methodology describes how the attacker first gains a foothold, but the impact depends on how many edges that foothold can traverse. A low-privilege account in a strongly segmented environment might have limited edges, while a similar account in a highly integrated environment might be connected to email, cloud storage, and internal applications through SSO. Your job in an incident is to quickly identify the hub systems, like the identity provider and email, then trace outward to high-impact spokes like finance tools, customer data platforms, and administrative consoles. This approach keeps you from overreacting to a single log entry while still treating interconnected access as a real risk. When you practice this enough, mapping becomes less like memorization and more like a calm, repeatable way to understand what is happening. By the end of this lesson, the key skill is the ability to hear about a credential event and immediately ask the right mapping questions. What identity was involved? What central systems trust that identity? What permissions flow from it? And what systems become reachable without additional friction? Credential attacks are rarely just about one login screen, because accounts are woven into workflows, recovery paths, and shared services that attackers can exploit. If you can describe the attacker's methodology in stages, identify the trust hubs like DS and SSO, and connect those hubs to likely impact categories like data exposure and permission changes, you can respond with clarity instead of fear. That clarity helps you prioritize what to investigate first, what to contain quickly, and what to monitor for follow-on movement, even when information is incomplete. Most importantly, Mapping turns a confusing flood of login signals into a structured picture of pathways and consequences, which is exactly the kind of beginner-friendly but professional-grade reasoning the GCIL mindset is meant to develop.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.